Mafia rescue story, domestic Marcus Chen stood on the edge of the rooftop, 47 stories above Manhattan, watching the city that once worshipped him now move on without a second thought. The wind whipped his designer suit, the last one he owned, as he clutched a crumpled eviction notice in his trembling hand. 24 months ago, his face had graced the covers of Forbes and Fortune. Today, he couldn't afford a cup of coffee. The fall from grace hadn't been gradual. It had been catastrophic, brutal, and absolute. One bad investment, one trusted partner's betrayal, one cascading series of lawsuits, and everything he'd built over 15 years had evaporated like morning mist. His penthouse, his cars, his so-called friends, his fiancée, all gone. And now, standing on this rooftop at 2 a.m., Marcus couldn't find a single reason to step back from the edge. The door behind him creaked open. Marcus didn't turn around. He didn't want to be saved. Didn't want some security guard talking him down with empty platitudes about how life gets better. But the voice that spoke wasn't what he expected. Beautiful night, isn't it? Mind if I take my break up here? Marcus glanced back to see a janitor in his 50s, carrying a worn thermos and a brown paper bag. The man's name tag read David. He had kind eyes, framed by laugh lines and calloused, hands that spoke of decades of hard work. He didn't look at Marcus with pity or recognition, just simple human acknowledgement. I'm kind of in the middle of something, Marcus said, his voice hollow. I can see that, David replied, settling down against the rooftop's maintenance shed, seemingly oblivious to what Marcus was actually doing. He opened his thermos and the smell of homemade soup drifted through the cold air. My daughter made this. Always makes too much. Insists I take some. He pulled out a second container from his bag. You hungry? I got extra. The absurdity of the moment broke something in Marcus. Here he was contemplating ending it all, and this janitor was offering him soup. Do you know who I am? He asked, almost laughing. Should I? I'm Marcus Chen. I used to own half this building. I was worth $800 million. The past tense burned his throat. Used to? David repeated, taking a sip of his soup. That's a heavy couple of words, aren't they? He gestured to the space beside him. The edge will still be there in 20 minutes. Sit with me first? Marcus didn't know why he complied. Maybe exhaustion, maybe curiosity, maybe some small part of him that still wanted to be seen as human. He sat down and David handed him the extra container. The soup was simple, vegetable and chicken, but it was warm, and Marcus realized he hadn't eaten in 2 days. My wife died 3 years ago, David said quietly, staring at the city lights. Cancer. The bills buried us even with insurance. Lost our house, my savings, everything I'd worked 30 years to build. I was right where you are now, except my ledge was a bridge over the Hudson. Marcus looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. I had my daughter to think about. She was 16, needed me. But I'm not going to lie to you and say that's what stopped me. David's voice cracked slightly. It was another janitor, actually. Guy named Roberto found me sitting on that bridge rail at 4 in the morning. He didn't give me some speech about how precious life is. He just sat next to me and told me about his own darkest night. Then he said something I'll never forget. You can always die tomorrow. But tonight, let's just see if we can find one small thing worth sticking around for. And you found something? Marcus asked, his voice barely a whisper. That night? Yeah, the sunrise. Sounds stupid, but I'd forgotten how beautiful they were. Then the next night? It was my daughter's laugh at something dumb on TV. Then it was the first decent coffee I'd had in weeks. Small things, one at a time. They started adding up. David turned to face Marcus. I'm not going to pretend I understand what you're going through. Your billions, my broken-down Toyota. Different scales, same human pain. But I learned something in my lowest moment. Our worth isn't in our bank accounts or our job titles. It's in the connections we make, the kindness we show, the lives we touch. Marcus felt something hot slide down his cheek. He couldn't remember the last time he'd cried. I don't have anything left. No connections. No one who cares if I live or die. You got me, David said simply. I care. And I'm about as real as it gets. He reached into his bag and pulled out half a sandwich. My daughter Emma made this too. She's in community college now, studying to be a teacher. Works at a diner on weekends to help with bills. Kid's tougher than anyone I've ever met. She always makes my lunch with little notes. He showed Marcus a sticky note that read, Love you, Dad. You're my hero. Something in those simple words shattered Marcus completely. He put his head in his hands and sobbed, deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere he'd forgotten existed. David didn't offer empty comfort. He just put a hand on Marcus's shoulder and let him break. When Marcus finally looked up, the sky was beginning to lighten. I don't know what to do, he admitted. I have nothing. I'm being evicted tomorrow. I have $83 to my name. Well, David said practically, first thing is we get you somewhere safe. I got a couch. It's not much, but it's yours if you need it. Tomorrow we figure out the next step. Why would you do that? You don't even know me, David smiled. Because Roberto gave me a couch when I needed it. And someday, maybe you'll have a couch for someone else who needs it. That's how this works. He stood up, offering Marcus his hand. Come on, my shift ends in an hour. Emma's making breakfast. She always makes too much. Marcus took his hand and let himself be pulled to his feet. As they walked toward the door, he turned back to look at the edge one last time. It seemed smaller now, less inevitable. He thought he'd lost everything. But standing next to this janitor who had every reason to be bitter, but chose kindness instead, Marcus realized he'd never really understood what having something meant. Over the following weeks, Marcus slept on David's worn couch and ate dinners with David and Emma in their small apartment. Emma treated him like a quirky uncle who'd fallen on hard times, never making him feel like a burden. She'd share stories about her customers at the diner, her dreams of teaching elementary school, her mother's memory. David worked his night shifts and spent his days helping Marcus navigate social services, update his resume, and remember how to be human again. Marcus started picking up day labor jobs, swallowing his pride with each shift. He washed dishes, moved furniture, cleaned offices alongside David. The work was exhausting and humbling, but it was honest. And slowly, imperceptibly, Marcus began to feel something he hadn't felt in years: peace. 3 months after that night on the rooftop, Marcus was walking home from a construction site when he saw a man in an expensive suit arguing loudly with a homeless person who'd apparently asked him for change. The businessman's words were cruel, dismissive, full of the same contempt Marcus had once wielded like a weapon. Marcus approached quietly and handed the homeless man a $20 bill, a significant portion of his week's wages. The man's grateful eyes reflected Marcus's own recent past. As Marcus walked away, he heard the businessman scoff. Must be nice to throw money away. Marcus turned back. That's not throwing money away. That's the best investment I've ever made. The words were true in a way his billions in tech stocks and real estate never had been. 1 year later, Marcus had clawed his way to assistant manager at a nonprofit helping formerly incarcerated people find employment. The pay was modest, but the work mattered. He'd started teaching a financial literacy course at Emma's community college, sharing hard-won lessons about the difference between wealth and worth. David still worked his night shifts, though Marcus kept trying to convince him to retire. Emma had transferred to a 4-year university, her tuition partially covered by a scholarship Marcus had quietly helped arrange. On the anniversary of the night Marcus had stood on that rooftop, the three of them sat in David's small living room, sharing pizza and cheap wine. Emma was regaling them with a story about a disastrous first day of her teaching practicum when someone knocked on the door. David opened it to find a man in his 30s, eyes red from crying, looking lost and desperate. I'm sorry to bother you, the man said, his voice breaking. I was told. Someone said that you might. I've got nowhere else to go. David looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at the couch where he'd slept, where he'd learned what grace felt like. He stood up and smiled at the stranger. Come in, you hungry? We've got pizza. It's not much, but it's yours. He extended his hand. I'm Marcus. As the man stepped inside, his shoulders sagging with relief, Marcus caught David's eye. The older man nodded with quiet pride. The cycle continued. The kindness multiplied. And Marcus Chen, who once thought he'd lost everything, finally understood that he'd gained the whole world. Outside, the city lights sparkled like earthbound stars, bearing witness to the truth that sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what really matters. And sometimes the most powerful person in your life isn't the one with billions in the bank, but the one with enough compassion to share a bowl of soup and remind you that you're human. That you matter, that tomorrow might just be worth seeing.